Coming up, the Brooklyn Nets kicked off the critical 3-game stretch that will determine their fates, as told to you by us, the Locked On Nets podcast, and they do not get things started in excellent fashion, falling to Cleveland. We break down what went wrong and pose questions around rotations, all coming up next.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, my friends, it is the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. Over there, you're going to find Doug Norrie, owner-operator of DFSR, for all your daily fantasy sports rankings from DraftKings to FanDuel. He's got you covered. I'm Adam Armbrecht, breaking down the New York Football Giants on the One Giant podcast and your New Jersey Devils on the Devils Puck Luck podcast. We thank you for making us your first listen of the day. We're free on all those great platforms. Let you know, today's episode is brought to you by the Ultimate Basketball GM. If you've ever dreamt about becoming an NBA GM and managing a basketball franchise, then this game is definitely for you. To download the game, just visit ultimatebasketballgm.com or look it up in the App Store. Our listeners get a 100% free boost to their franchise when using promo code all caps locked on in the game. And Doug, we said it. We set the table. It's only ourselves to blame here when you say that the Brooklyn Nets are entering a critical 3-game stretch. This Cleveland matchup, we're going to go through all the little nooks and crannies of it, but ultimately, it's a game that the Nets came out strong to start, but just didn't seem to have enough to sustain.
Yeah, they came out strategically and did some things that I thought were pretty interesting. The Cavs solved it almost immediately by the right. Second quarter, and away you went, cute. And we could talk about what some of that was. I mean, I think some of it was kind of interesting and worth noting probably a little bit later here in the podcast. But just on a high level, you saw what sort of happens when you go against a really talented team and you don't have as much talent. And I hate to have it be that simple, because it's not. There's other things that are definitely going on here, right? But when there's only 10 guys on the court for the most part, and the other team has at least 2 of the best and maybe 3, depending on where you want to rank, like Bridges against Mobley, it's just going to be a very difficult thing to do. It's going to be very difficult to win these games. And I'm not saying they're foregone conclusions. They're clearly not. I'm not even being defeatist. I think the Nets could have won this game. So it's not even that. It's more to highlight how difficult it is for the Nets. What we're learning about the Nets right now is it's very hard. This is hard. When they have to play these teams where they are out talented, everything has to go right for them. And when those and actually, it's crazy. They had some things go crazy right for them in this game. We'll get into some of the stats. Some of the stats in this game were totally flipping the script on what the Nets usually do. But in the end, the backcourt stuff for the Cavs was too much. The Nets can't make any threes all of a sudden, or actually not all of a sudden, kind of for a while now. Yeah. And this becomes the story. And if this is going to be the story for the team, what we talked about yesterday about this 3-game stretch, it's hard to see a lot of ways out of it. It's a make or miss league for sure. But yeah, this is just kind of what happens, even just on a talent level in the NBA.
115-109 is the final. The Nets try to make a little bit of a late push there in this game. It's not as close as the final scoreline tells you, but there was at least this little tiny glimmer of a moment where they can make a push. But you mentioned the stat there that's been kind of plaguing them now of late, and that's the perimeter shooting. In a game where the Cleveland Cavaliers play a slow pace, they're very methodical, and it benefits them when you have a Donovan Mitchell, when you have a Garland. You mentioned Mobley, Jared Allen, right? All these things lean into them. The Nets took 9 more shots in this game than Cleveland, but they were outshot 50-44 overall, and then 9 for 33 for the Nets from beyond the arc. 27% for a team like this, as we know, that is not perfect, that isn't the final iteration of what we think could be a playoff team that could be highly competitive. They need the 3 ball to fall. And when those looks aren't happening, the fact that they came out of the first quarter up 7, by the way, before giving up, they flipped the script here, Doug. They had been giving up monster quarters to start games and then trying to get themselves back on track. This one, they gave the fan base that, hey, 30-23. If we clamp down defensively and you're a slow-paced team, you try to figure it out. Well, they did, as you said at the top, very quickly. That second quarter becomes the 38-point, the third quarter, 33 points. And really, everything after that first quarter was Cleveland just basically saying, we are the better team, and our backcourt is a backcourt that is going to give you nightmares once they get into their rhythm. They played very patiently in the first quarter, Mitchell, Garland, and then in that second and third quarter, they really took things over. And because they effectively broke down what the Nets tried to do.
Yeah, so what the Nets were trying to do in that first quarter was they were trapping the high pick and roll against Garland specifically, and there was 3 possessions in a row where it looked like Garland was really lost. Like it probably wasn't part of the game plan. Nets don't trap like that a ton. They usually just switch and pass everybody off, right? But with these 2 guards, it was like, hey, if we can be super disruptive with these 2 guys, leave the other shooters like the Okoros of the world, right? Just like wide open. Karis LeVert can be wide open. Like those guys are allowed to shoot as much as they want. And we're just going to be really disruptive at the point of attack. And it actually did cause some problems. Like that was why the Nets, among other things, were able to really hold them kind of in check in that first quarter to only 23 points because they were able to force turnovers. They were able to just really get the Cavs out of the rhythm. But by the time the second quarter came around, the Cavs made adjustments, and that's why all of a sudden you started to see like real confusion. Like the Nets couldn't keep the screen, they couldn't keep it the level on the screens, and then Garland and Mitchell to some degree also were just kind of able to work their way in, and then that's why the points, and that's why the Cavs were able to just start working into the big men, because then it's pick your poison. Like that's only going to work for so long. You can't just trap these guys the whole game. So anyway, I did like the Nets strategy to start this game. I thought that was the right move. I'm not surprised it didn't work the whole time. Like that's just not going to work the whole time. It's meant to kind of make you think that more than it is to actually be a problem. But what we saw in the second quarter on was that once the point of attack defense from the Nets, in conjunction with the Nets not making any threes, like these 2 things happening simultaneously, this is where you saw the game start getting out of hand because they couldn't stop the pick and roll at all. They couldn't stop the guys working their way into the paint, and then that's just going to leave open shooters and away you go. So strategically, I like what the Nets did. I do think it's like they're undermanned to a point where this isn't like all that surprising, and we're just getting it highlighted that like if the Nets, even when the Nets do things correctly, if they can't hit the threes, like you said,
right?
Like what are we doing? They can't win. They can't win. That's it. Like and I'll give after the break a little bit. I'll give you another stat, which is going to make you really. You're going to head to the Doug Norrie town of hair management because there's another stat here. There's another stat here that's going to drive you nuts. But like in general, it's like even when they do some things right, they have to have everything go right. Everything needs to go correctly. They cannot. They have no margin for error with this stuff.
And that's really, the good counter punch or the first punch and then not having the counter punch, not having the second step. And that just comes down to, you said it all the time on this podcast. We used to say it when we had Kevin Durant. That's why you have Kevin Durant, because guess what? He's the great overcomer of other deficiencies. The Nets don't necessarily have that. And we're going to get into those stats and what Doug Norrie is violently shaking his hands about in just 1 second after we take a trip down to Dougtown of hair management. We will also tell you about what I mentioned at the top, and that is the ultimate pro basketball GM. I've said this before. You ever dreamt about being an NBA GM? I would have made some different choices. Probably gave the superstars. That's me. You do it a different way if you're Joe Tsai and you're Sean Marks. You can go ahead right now, though, and go through all the phases of hiring coaches, hiring assistants, trading, and training your players, and, of course, going through the draft, building your roster, and hopefully leading them to a championship. I've been having a good time with it. The question I have right now is, do I just load up all my assets and go get myself a star? The answer is probably yes. Locked On Nets show listeners are going to get a 100% free boost to their franchise when using promo code Locked On, all caps, all one word, in the game store. So make sure to go check it out. To download the game, you can visit probasketballgm.com, scan the code, or look it up on the app stores. That's probasketballgm.com. Ultimate Basketball GM, start your dynasty today. And so, Doug, before we get into some of the other stats, go ahead and pick up there what was getting you ready to start doing the old. I'm not going to use my voice, but I will hand signal. I have something important I want to say.
All I was going to say was like the reason you trap a guy like these guys like Mitchell and Garland is because you don't have like the point of attack defense to like really cause them problems. So you have to like gimmick it a little bit. Not like a trap's a total gimmick, but it's a little gimmicky because it's a huge risk, right? Like if you trap someone, then there's just someone else open. It's a double team. It's like a fun way to say double team. So like you do that when you know you're completely undermanned, right? So when they went back to not doing that, you saw what ended up happening, which is they got completely cooked, right? Like it's like they knew that was going to happen. They know for as good as like some of these guys are at wing defense, they're just not great point of attack defenders. Garland and Mitchell are significantly faster than everybody else on the Nets, right? So like, I'm just not, I guess my point is I'm not surprised by saying that. I'm not surprised it happened. You have to get a little gimmicky at times. But good players like this, like these guys are great players. Like they're just going to solve this stuff pretty quickly.
And you mentioned that there too, before we talk about some other key stats here, the shocking areas that the Nets won and still lost this game. Talking about a backcourt like Cleveland has in Mitchell and Garland, it really does diminish some of the defensive value that you have on this roster, the Cam Johnsons, the Mikal Bridges, the Royce O'Neals, right? Spencer Dinwiddie, even for just having the right size, right? The requisite length and size there. It's just the kind of matchups where you go, and those players are of that caliber, but it's not it's the double down. They're two of the best players on the court, and they expose one of your strengths in a very negative way. And I think that that's what really becomes crippling for this Nets team, because you can't just lean on it and go, we'll lock this guy up. And we've seen previous matchups where the length of the Brooklyn Nets defense across their roster overall has helped them. Doesn't make a difference when you're playing Mitchell and you're playing Garland.
Yeah, and then here's the other one that's just going to drive Nets fans totally crazy. So a team that is among the very worst in the league at offensive rebounding somehow tonight gets like the most offensive rebounds they've ever had in a game. I mean, this might have been a combo deal on like multiple games. They out-rebounded the Cavs on the offensive glass 19-8. I can personally not remember another time the Nets. Usually this is completely flipped the other way. Like some other team has 19 offensive rebounds, and we're sitting there and just staring at, second chance points, more second chance points, more second chance points. Tonight, the Nets actually were able, it could be mostly because of Day'Ron Sharpe, we're able to control the offensive glass. So on a night where they even actually do something that they never do well, ever, like for multiple seasons now, they've totally sucked at this part of the game. They actually do it well. And then for them to still kind of lose by, I know it looks closer than it was, but it really wasn't that close. It's just even more maddening. Now, you mentioned at the beginning that the Cavs didn't have to take that many shots. Well, I mean, unfortunately, they made almost all their shots. So when you make all your shots, you don't have a lot of chance for offensive rebounds when your ball just goes in every time. So like that also is going to throw the stat off a little bit. But just in general, it's just so funny that we go completely nuts about this all year.
Yeah. And
finally they completely crush another team in it, and they get crushed. And I'm just like, well, now you just can't win for losing with this kind of stuff.
The Nets, by the way, they won on points in the paint. And again, second chance opportunities versus just making your first shots. Won that 54-44. They won on fast break points 15-9. Not surprising with the pace of play of the Cleveland Cavaliers. Had 25-18 advantage and points off of turnovers. They ended up, by the way, the Nets, I saw this, I was looking this up in game, are the third best in turnovers since the trade deadline, had 17, lost that by 3 in this game. So there's a couple of little ones like that, but just to your point, it's like there's a ton of statistical categories that are in the Nets' favor, and don't let the final tally fool you here. This is a double-digit loss for the Brooklyn Nets, who, by the way, we're up 7 at the end of the first, and at one point we're trailing this game by 24, and as we know in the NBA, there just are stretches when teams take their foot off the gas a little bit. They see if it's going to be, hey, do we need to bring our starters back in and all, or can we just coast here? They did. They had to bring Mitchell back in just to go ahead and bury things, and that's at about the 5.5-minute mark, which Doug Norrie, this show, collectively we are famous for saying the wrong thing at the perfect time. And that was, well, at least this game's going to end quickly. They proceeded to go ahead and drag that down for about a 15-minute final 3 minutes in the fourth.
Yeah, it can never go any other way. And just to also highlight sort of like a long-term now problem for the Nets, because we're harping on the three-point shooting. We're harping on a couple different issues here for the Nets. Obviously, the talent gap is first and foremost. And just like sort of just where the team is built not perfectly to handle certain other. And look, Cleveland's a really good team. So I'm not taking anything away from Cleveland here. Like Cleveland's awesome. Right. Like they're a really they have the best point differential. Yeah, they have the second best point. They have the first best point differential in the East. Like they're playing way under. Actually, they're probably their Pythagorean record right now. Like Pythagorean wise, they'd be the number 1 seed. So like this is a really, really good team. But the Nets, continue to struggle, it's not just your eyes, right? It's like, oh my gosh, like we talked the other night about how many threes are just going down and like how many just very close threes are not going down. But this is an ongoing problem since the All-Star break, and which is after the trade deadline. But once everyone's sort of gotten their feet wet, and it's just like a nice break point for like where to look up some stats. The Nets rank 25th in 3-point percentage, 25th. Like that's horrible. You're the only teams that are worse than them since the All-Star break in 3-point shooting. Jazz headed for the lottery. Pistons headed for the deep lottery. Hornets, absolutely total trash. Rockets and Magic. I mean, these are the worst teams in the league, basically. Like and the Nets, right? Like those.
Yeah.
And in a league where the 3-point shot is easily the most important shot outside of just like a wide open dunk. Like if this is where you're gonna be, this is where your record's gonna be. Like you can't win. There's a reason the rest of those teams are duking it out now for who's going to get Victor Wembanyama. Right. And then there's the Nets who are like on the edge of the play-in. So it's just a macro problem with this team too. They can't hit threes and some of it's probably bad luck, but not all of it.
Before we, because coming up, we're going to talk a little bit about individual players, rotational questions here as the Nets continue to search for a backup center. Maybe they've already had one this whole time in Day'Ron Sharpe. I want to get into that, but let's just tie a bow on this particular first of the 3 games we said we're going to be critical. Is it disappointing to have how disappointing is it to have it be that the game goes this way in this particular matchup? Because we know they're going to play them again coming up right here. And from everything we discussed over the first 2 segments, it's hard to kind of squint and see the way this next game is going to go differently outside of, well, if the threes go down, then all of a sudden it can be a different script early, but all the defensive issues are still going to be there, and you're still going to be looking for who can step up on the other end of the floor.
Yeah, so I mean, it can be really hard in the moment to see a game and think of how it could go any more differently than it would go now, right? This is why sometimes watching the playoffs, is really tough when you watch 2 good teams because you're like, oh, they just got killed. They'll never win another game, and then you just play the next game and the other team wins. This is kind of what happens. It doesn't change my feeling too much about the team. It is disappointing because you would have liked to bank one early. It's a home game. You still have a moderate advantage when you're at home, even though they went into this game as an underdog. I still think there are like little things that could have gone differently here. Like the Cavs still did shoot totally lights out. The Nets couldn't make a 3. Again, macro problems. This could swing like, a 3-shot swing here on some of these threes. And we are having a different conversation. So I don't think they're just dead and buried here by any stretch of the imagination. And there were times when it looked so easy for the Cavs. Like Mitchell had multiple highlights that like you do in pickup games. I mean, obviously he ended Utah's life on that dunk. And then he had a step back 3 where he basically, it was like a park move. Like
Richard Jefferson couldn't describe it on the broadcast. He couldn't find the right words to describe what the move was.
He called it a God sham God. Like it was sort of a hesitation dribble step back, but he was like stepping back as the ball was like sort of on a string. Anyway, point being, these are the things that look easy. And so when you see that, it's a little concerning. But no, I think that like they could definitely play them again and be in the game. I know that, but they're always going to struggle. They don't have the same level of talent as the other teams.
So coming up in a second, we'll discuss if Jacque Vaughn has been making a mistake in searching for a backup center with the performance of Day'Ron Sharpe, and I'll highlight why Spencer Dinwiddie might be the most complete player that the Brooklyn Nets have right now.
All right, before we get into that, going to tell you about our friends over on FanDuel. It's the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. New customers are going to get no sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back. If your first bet doesn't win, just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app now. It's safe, secure, super easy to use. You can bet on everything from the money line to point scorers and threes drains. Someone tweeted at me the other night. They were talking about how they're like, oh my gosh, can you believe that you can bet on like how many rebounds Nick Claxton get in the game? I was like, hey, take a look at FanDuel. That's just like the tip of the iceberg. What you can do over on FanDuel. That's the easy stuff. I was like, are you kidding me? Rebounds? I mean, we got everything over there. You can get you can go for exact number of rebounds. You could do same game parlays where you put it all together. You can get first point scored. You can go scale it all the way up for how many points a guy's going to score in a given game. I mean, it's really gets super granular over on FanDuel. It makes the game super fun to watch. Great sweats every single time. FanDuel lets you combine those bets for a big payout with the aforementioned same game parlay. Don't miss the chance to get your no sweat first bet up to $1,000 when you go to FanDuel.com/locked-on. That's FanDuel.com/locked-on to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA.
Okay, so let's start with the Day'Ron Sharpe situation of it all, because there's a guy out there on the court tonight, and we know this is a matchup that's built for him. 8 of 12 from the field in 20 minutes of action, up plus 27 on the night. Only ends up being 5 players, actually, because the bench had a lot of plus minutes for themselves in marginal areas. But 11 rebounds. You mentioned how you end up winning the rebound battle by a significant margin. Day'Ron can do that for you, because he'll go ahead and bank that thing off the backboard a couple of times and grab a few rebounds and get back up. Tongue in cheek, but he's so active. He is so active and disruptive, and he's not a perfect player, and he doesn't have a shot to his game. But when I watch the game like tonight, we're even on the defensive end, where he is no Nicholas Claxton, but is at least athletic enough that when they want to stretch out the bigs to the perimeter, he can move out there. He can stay with someone, push him in the right direction. I do always come back to, because this is the game, and this is the matchup that we say, oh, that's where you can play Day'Ron. He cannot be this good and impactful in a game like this and somehow not be playable any other game of the year. Like I am coming to a place here where there's a little bit of frustration around the idea of like, so this dude must be so horrendous in something that the eye test is not telling me.
Look, I can't believe you said he has no shot. He's shooting 60% from 3 on the season, 6 for 10. He drained another one tonight. How dare you? How dare you say Day'Ron Sharpe can't?
And by the way, I know you're joking, because it's.
I'm not joking about. He is 60% from 3. I'm not joking about that.
It is a fact that is real. And by the way, like, because 6 of 10, he doesn't play a lot. Guess what? Have him shoot 2, have him play and shoot 2 a game. Like, at a minimum, put him in the game and have him be the one big that you own that could take a shot from the perimeter in some capacity and still be big enough to get you some rebounds. Like, it's a small, little sample size stat. Only guy you have that can do it. Why not utilize him? I don't know why this is frustrating me now.
I mean, yeah, I will, not to throw cold water on it, because this is easily his best game, 20 and 11, 8 for 12. Like you said, the plus 27 is totally crazy. He played his way and earned his way into that closing group that was trying to make the comeback. So it's all good. I do think the energy, just to like kind of piggyback on something you said, the energy and the motor works until it doesn't, because there's times where the energy and motor is just all over the place. Like the body's completely out of control. He's in the wrong spots. Like he misses assignments. He's a total foul machine at times. And so
these are all the other things. These are the things I'm pushing under the rug.
I know. Look, I don't want to do it, because he was great tonight. It was awesome. It was fun to watch. I want him to be good. Like I really do. We've been rooting for him for a while. I do think that the stretch capability that he has is underutilized. I do think that actually is an issue. Like I wish they would run more pick and pop stuff with him, like, which they never ever do. Like the threes that he gets are garbage time, sort of like just he's out there and the stakes are pretty low. I mean, tonight that one, it was kind of like late game. So, I'm with
2
you.
blocks, 2 steals as well, just in the stat line.
Yeah, and they just don't have like that pick and pop game. Like they don't really run that with any of their other personnel. So it'd just be like a totally new thing to do with him. I do wish they would try that a little bit more, because I think he can shoot. And so, but it's just not part of what their like sort of DNA is on offense. And and honestly, I guess we'll talk about Dinwiddie here in a second.
Yeah.
Dinwiddie's been great. Dinwiddie is not a kind of point guard that like makes bigs better. And This is the other issue. Like, this is not the comparison, but a Chris Paul who's taken every big he's ever played with and made them just amazing, essentially.
Right.
Like Dinwiddie just isn't like that kind of guy. He's really, really good at some things, but he's not good at running like pick and pop, pick and roll kind of stuff with big centers. And the Nets don't want to do it anyway. But I do wish it is underutilized. I do. Yeah. We've scratched our head all season about why there isn't more playing time for him. We've said this about multiple guys at times this season, and he falls into that head scratching category of the team's young. They're not winning the championship. You have to play these guys.
Right.
Like, even if it looks bad, you have to play them.
Yeah, that's as much a part of it too. And just a good footnote here, over the last 3 games, the last 2 games, let's just say, 3 or 4 from the line in each of those last 2 games against Cleveland, against Denver. Again, a big that can consistently make his free throws at times for him. Not something he's done consistently over his young career, but he had been known to be able to do that. And it's college, coming out of UNC?
North
And
Carolina?
the reason why North Carolina, sorry. And the reason why you projected forward, you looked at those percentages, you said this can be a guy that can knock down those perimeter shots eventually. Let's close out then. I said it there before on Spencer Dinwiddie. I do find it, a game like this is interesting to me because one of the things that you notice for like a Mikal Bridges, who is the best player on this team, but in a game when he goes 0 of 8, just 0 of 8 from beyond the arc, there was contrasting possessions where going down one way, he's working into the mid-range and knocking down what seems like a very consistent and makeable shot for him. And then you go the other way, and Donovan Mitchell's like, bang, triple. Go ahead. You're down. You're -1 now. Do it again. Nice little mid-range. Bang. Triple in the corner on an unmarked Karis LeVert. And it starts to get a little bit lethargic there as far as what the game can look like on the offensive end. But Dinwiddie playing 38 minutes, 6 of 15. He's bad from beyond the arc in this one as well. Got to the line 8 times in this game. Gave you the 11 assists again, so double-digit assists. Like, complete game. Only guy in the starting rotation that was plus in the plus-minus, 19 points. There is something to be said for being a player that regardless of the matchup, regardless of some of the difficulties in assignment, is always going to be able to find a way to have that impact on the game in different ways, right? When it's cooking and the floor spacing is there, Dinwiddie can lean into his perimeter shooting. And he's at least shown the ability, and we know the areas where it's frustrating, but he's shown the ability to say, okay, I need to put my head down now. I need to attack at the basket. I have that little bit of burst. I'm a longer guard. I have some of that upper body strength to be able to attack. Like, it's worth noting that he has had to kind of evolve his game on the fly coming back in here and say, you're now the point guard. He's been doing an excellent job with it. And I thought when you look at that starting rotation in particular, there's a lot of guys here you can point to and say, boy, when the shot isn't falling for a Cam Johnson, and he had an okay game tonight, 4 of 11, 2 of 4 from deep and got to the line. But when sometimes that perimeter shooting isn't falling, it's a lot harder to say, but I have great defensive value, right? It's got to be, all these guys need to be two-way players consistently for this team to have success.
I thought Dinwiddie's first quarter was like as good of a first quarter as he's played all season, played with the Nets. It was he was completely locked in, and to the point where, and he only had 4 points, I think, but it was clear to me that at least in this system, he was beginning to see the angles better. Like he was really, really distributing. Like he had one kind of cross court pass through traffic, which is actually really not his game. Because one, he's just not big enough to usually make that pass. But he kind of just understood where the shooters were going to be. It was the Cam Johnson. I don't know if they made the shot, but the point is that the look was great. And I was like, man, he's actually understanding the angles here a lot better. And I agree with you. They've needed him. If they had anyone even 10% worse in his position, the Nets it'd be so bad. It'd be so bad. They actually really kind of, funnily enough, have nobody on the team that can do what he does. They don't have anyone behind him. They have other guys who are nominal backup point guards. Sumner is kind of a backup point guard. Sumner can't do the things that Dinwiddie can do. Cam Thomas can do a lot of things, but he's not an offensive facilitator the way Dinwiddie is. And by the way, if you look, I mentioned from the All-Star break on, Dinwiddie is 6th in the league in assists since the All-Star. 7th in the league in assists since the All-Star break. Halliburton first, though the games are low, it wouldn't matter. He's crushing everybody. Harden, Chris Paul, Jokic, Trae Young, Fred VanVleet, and Spencer Dinwiddie. Those are the assist leaders over essentially the last month in basketball. Now, funny enough, Dinwiddie is the only guy in that group that's minus in the plus minus when he's on the court. So it's a little weird about what's happening, but regardless, he's been very, very important. He's been critical. They would be getting demolished if they had traded him even for just some sort of other combo guard or something like that. He's been super, super important for at least keeping them afloat in a lot of this stuff, just because he can at least dissect some things, even if it's not traditional point guard kind of stuff.
And I think the biggest part of that is probably just from a macro level is being able to get a sample size of what the offense can look like, what Mikal Bridges, Cam Johnson, right? What these pieces can look like if you have a functional point guard like that. Maybe it doesn't end up being Spencer Dinwiddie, and we'll talk about it down the line. But remember, going to this offseason and next year and the money and everything else with Dinwiddie, hold your horses about moving on from him and getting value back, because unless you have something waiting in the wings, which the Nets don't have right now, He's the guy. Like, you need this player that's capable of doing it. I'll close out my last thought just by saying on the Cam Johnson front, he hasn't had some great games of late, but I'm just looking at his box score, which can tell you different things. I think the defense was okay in this one. Again, bad matchups, certainly more difficult matchups for him. But the kind of night that he had here, 34 minutes, 4 of 11, 2 of 4 from deep, but then 3 rebounds, 4 assists, and a steal thrown in there with the 16 points. Like, a little bit more, but that's kind of in the range where you'd like to see him consistently, where he's actually touching a lot of the boxes on the stat sheet. He's been a little bit up and down. Everybody has been up and down, especially with the perimeter shooting. I don't know if Dorian Finney-Smith can come out of funks, right, and find a way to impact games consistently. Cam Johnson needs to show this, because they said on the broadcast again tonight, here's a guy that wants the $100 million 5-year contract based on what he's done to start his career. You got to showcase that you are 100% deserving of that. It's a big check to cut here for a guy that you're going to have for what, 20, 30 games.
Yeah, I mean, the stats have not been that great since he came. If he can't hit threes, it's really gets downhill pretty fast on him. So we can talk about him a little bit more later this week. I'm sure we're going to talk a ton about him in the offseason too, because it's going to be sort of a critical decision. And look, this is small sample size stuff too. So it's change of scenery, small sample size. I'm not going to read too much into it. The guy's been 40% on lock for his whole career from 3. Yeah. So I don't think, 15 games switches a guy's career. It's been a poorly timed 15 games for where it went down. But we'll talk about more about him a little later. Appreciate everyone that jumped into YouTube. Make sure you subscribe to Locked On Nets YouTube to make sure you know when we're going live. Obviously, if you're listening on the podcast feed, this is a live on YouTube. We've got a ton of people in chat asking questions. Much appreciated. So make sure you subscribe to Locked On Nets over at YouTube.
Hi, I'm Bob. Would you knock me out, please? Just hit me in the face. Bob Wiley from What About Bob?
Also, Bob Wiley, the name of my grandfather, which is always a fun Nori fact. That's my grandfather's name, Bob Wiley. We had fun with that one, buddy. That was about the
I'm sure.
One of the most fun things about him was he was named after Bill Murray's character. And What About Bob? There you go. All right, we are going to get out of here. One of the all-time great poets will be back again tomorrow talking more about grandfathers as well.
All right, the podcast is here. Throw up your questions. You guys know the deal. I'm going to just give everybody the very clear heads up here. I don't know how long I am for this session. I'll let Doug carry the banner.
No, we're going to be quick. We're going to be quick tonight with this one. We went a little long on Sunday, and we'll be back again Thursday with a longer one. But this one's going to be a pretty quick live session. So if you have a question, make sure you throw it up. There you go, Clash, long-time listener. All-time great listener is Clash.
Anything else that anyone wants
Clash
to talk
might be
about?
with us from the early days too. I can't remember. All I know is Clash is all over this thing. So much appreciated, my man.
Yeah, me and Clash over on Twitter. He's always there. He's always there, chopping it up, supporting my comments, telling me how smart I am. I love it.
Actually, I'll bring this one up. Let's start talking about hooking up Sharpe and Claxton multiple times a game. Okay, so let me clarify one thing. One thing Spencer is okay at is rim running with centers. That wasn't what I was actually talking about. I was more meaning like pick and pop. I was referencing like pick and roll. Like, just watch Darius Garland play and watch Spencer Dinwiddie play. Like, there's clear differences in like their overall point guard, sort of like body control, dissection, like working their way into the lanes, finding spots, like slowing down, right? Like slowing down and seeing the court. Like, Dinwiddie that's just not his game. It's not a knock, by the way. We complimented the heck out of him. It's not that. And he can, although it hasn't looked great at times, like he can throw lobs. Like he used to do this with Jared Allen a lot too. It's not that. That actually wasn't what I was. That rim run kind of stuff is not really what I was referencing. So,
and you even said too, system based, right? Like what's being asked of you in doing it. So versus getting involved up at the top of the key, the pick and pop, like you mentioned, versus when we're out in transition. Yeah, Spencer Dinwiddie does that thing very well. It's different when you want to set up offenses, and then the personnel that you're also playing with. At the same time.
Also wants to get into like switches a lot, and he wants to be able to break. He wants to get into an advantageous switch and break that guy off the dribble, and then see what happens. Like see what materializes. It's like he'll materialize based on like, hey, I'm open here. I'm in the lane now. Like I'm getting to the rim. I need to stop. It's just different. It's not conducive to like usually making your bigs like super offensive forces. Like that's just
Right.
that's kind of not what he's doing, I don't think.
Which is I'm not doubling down just because he said that we're the best, which frankly we are. But why won't JV play Sumner as the backup point guard? Curry was horrible in the second quarter. If we're gonna do one thing that I will say as far as critiquing what we saw tonight, and I'm not, I'll put it this way: Sumner is longer. He's a better defender. He's a different player to be bringing in off the bench. This is the type of matchup. If it's a matchup for Day'Ron Sharpe, it's not a matchup for Seth Curry. And I know it was a very small sample, but I would have thought, yeah, give me a little Sumner time here as opposed to Seth Curry. It is the part that Jock Vaughn struggles to me at times to, from the start of the game, already identify what's going to work or not work and avoid wasting some critical minutes potentially on a guy that's going to struggle specifically on the defensive end for Curry. And then frankly, even on the offensive end, Curry just looked off, which only makes it a more glaring issue.
Sorry, I was reading these questions real quick.
It's all good. So I gave the solid answer.
Said, yeah.
We need not even review it anymore. That's my thought on Curry. This was the other one real quick before you hop in on ones that you have. Do you think the JV will now start running more of a 10-man rotation rather than 7-ish? Listen, we saw some Yuta tonight. Again, I just talked about Curry. Didn't like it. Could have seen some more Sumner. We've now been saying this for a while, that on a matchup-to-matchup, game-to-game basis, you can look down the bench and say either guys are marginally ahead or behind one another in terms of value, and then there's situations when you want to play them more. So, yes, he should be. It looks like they're starting to go in that direction. Remember, Moses Brown at some point is going to get some run here. They suggested, but that could be a very much one-to-one. Day'Ron stops seeing the court, and they start playing this 10-day contract.
Yeah, I was clear actually from the very beginning, from the first rotation, because they had an extra guy in the first rotation than they normally have. It's usually 1 or 2 guys in the first one, and they was 3 this time. And it was like, oh, okay, it was already a very clear, difference in that they were playing an extra guy in this game. So I think that's good. I still would play some more of these guys more. I just don't get it totally, but I think they have like sort of conflicting goals here. Like they don't. I mean, clearly the goal is to make the playoffs. So maybe their goals aren't conflicting. I think their goals conflict with what they should be actually have their goals oriented toward. And I think that's what's conflicting to me. Like the goals should not be to get swept in the first round of the playoffs, which it feels like they're trying desperately to do. But
do the worst of all worlds, avoid the play-in, but also get swept.
It's like I get they're in a tough
Gets
spot.
Choked out
right?
every time we talk about playoffs.
They're in a tough spot with this thing because you have to put your best foot forward. He sold a bunch of tickets. Like you can't lose. Like you can't tank. I would just try to thread the needle a little bit more where I just played some of these young guys like a little bit more. And if you lost, you lost. And I don't think actually anyone would be too upset if they just tried with some of these younger dudes. But that's maybe I'm misreading. Maybe I'm misunderstanding it. I'm not sure.
Well, I was going to say too, like I won't bother like explaining the why of it, but like not having a little bit of Cam Thomas over Curry in a game like this, right? Like that's the kind of thing where you go, hey, like this is kind of a game for him when you're trailing by big numbers and you need a big spark.
Oh, with Seth Curry?
Yeah. Like these 10, I looked at it. It's actually 10 minutes for Curry. Like, so, hey, if you're going to give 10 minutes to somebody, we don't have to go back to the deadline and the way we felt about it then, but 10 minutes for Curry. I don't even need to, even if he had a great game, I'd still say the value is in playing Cam Thomas for 10 minutes just because you know the both and can be a spark now and you're trying to develop him for later. We understand there's some level of behind the scenes issues.
I just don't. I would love to, it wouldn't be the worst thing to be a fly on the wall to just sort of understand on a game-to-game basis like what they were trying to do. I think what they're trying to do is like be cool to some of these veterans and they just don't have the same sort of philosophy with the young guys. I don't know. We've talked about this like every podcast now, but like it is weird. This has nothing to do with what we're talking about, but it has something to do with Seth Curry. Today was like the something anniversary of like when Steph Curry had his like breakout Davidson game in the when they beat Gonzaga in the tournament. Like I was like 10 years ago or whatever it was. And I was watching this video and it was like crazy because I can this has nothing to do with the Nets, but it was crazy because like, I remember watching those games and being like, this is unbelievable. It's like the coolest sports thing ever. Like no one's ever heard of this guy. And he's just like absolutely murdering these teams. And he looks like these videos do it even crazy justice. Like he looks like he's 12 years old, Steph Curry in these games. Like he's got the uniform super baggy. He's got a shaved head. He can't weigh more than 155 pounds. Like, and he scored like 40 points against Gonzaga. It's like impossible to score 40 points in a college basketball game. And then I was watching this, and then little Seth Curry's in the crowd. It's like during they're doing all the highlights, and they go over to Dell, his dad and his mom are going nuts in the stands or whatever. And then little Seth is standing there just like smiling.
You got it, bro.
Again, this has nothing to do with the game, but you got to go watch this video of Steph Curry, and you're gonna be like, it's like you're gonna be like, they let 6th graders play college basketball. Like that's what you're gonna think when you look at this guy. He looks so freaking young. Anyway, that's all.
Now, listen, that's the point of the podcast. Any other questions that anybody wants to get in, shout them out now, because we are going to wrap this one up momentarily and remind everybody it's right back at it. Another game here. And by the way, we didn't say in the podcast, the Nets, Miami, without doing a darn thing, are now a half game closer to the Brooklyn Nets and that 6th seed. Just a half game up right now with that Saturday night one looming.
Well, Brooklyn almost rhymes with play-in, so that's where we are right now with the
play-in is spelled BrookLyn.
Yeah, so I don't know. I think it probably is where we're headed. It's going to be interesting to see. We'll get out of here. I think we're gonna. Adam's a little under the weather. He's put in a hero effort here. He was sick all day, and I said, "Do you want a solo, buddy?" But I didn't really mean it. I didn't really want a solo, but I figured I was gonna be. I did like a nice guy thing where I offered it, and I was like, "You son of a gun! If you say yes, I'll be so annoyed."
Swear to God,
I was like,
I swear to God, if you say yes,
drink a cup of coffee and get on the podcast. But if you want me to solo, I will. Okay, we're gonna get out of here. Much appreciated for everyone that jumped in here. We're definitely gonna be back following the Thursday game against Cleveland, which now looms is even more important, and then obviously barreling toward this game against Miami. Appreciate everyone that jumped in the YouTube chat. I know this stuff's still flying at us, but we're going to take off for the night. Make sure you subscribe if you haven't done already. We will be back again tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.